Maya Carter crouched at the start line, her heart hammering in her chest, the cold wind cutting through her uniform as she tried to focus on the obstacle course ahead. Her body ached from weeks of training, her muscles screaming for rest, but she forced them to obey every command. Every instruction drilled into her since day one of SEAL training. She could feel the eyes of her unit on her. The whispered doubts, the mocking smirks, the subtle jabs meant to undermine her confidence, they didn't. No, she felt them. She could sense every look, every thought aimed at her, and it fueled something deep inside her, a fire that refused to die. She glanced at the climbing wall that loomed like a steel giant before her, the mud beneath her boots sucking. At her every step, she took a breath, inhaling the scent of wet earth and sweat, and pushed herself forward. Her hands gripped the rough surface of the wall, fingers slipping in the rain as she hoisted herself upward. She could hear the laughter from behind the wall, mocking her efforts, telling her she didn't belong, that she would fail, that she was weak. And for a moment, doubt flickered in her mind. She hesitated, letting the other trainees surge ahead, but then she felt it. A presence watching, her a shadow beyond the field. Someone tall and solid standing with arms crossed their posture, calm and assured, someone who was not here to jeer or laugh. Someone who observed with precision and intensity. She could not make out their face, but she knew instinctively they were a person of authority, and they had eyes only for her. A shiver ran down her spine. Not from fear, but from recognition that someone finally saw what she was capable of. She reached the top of the wall, her arms trembling, her legs aching. She paused for a fraction of a second to steady herself, and then jumped, landing on the muddy ground below, rolling to absorb the impact. Her boots sank into the wet earth, and she felt her uniform stick to her skin. The other trainees were already moving toward the next obstacle, smirking at her slow progress. But she ignored them. She was not racing against them. She was racing against every doubt they had placed in her mind, every insult, every sneer, every whisper of her inadequacy. The rope climb was next, a thick rope dangling from the ceiling, slick with rain and mud. She wrapped her fingers around it and pulled herself upward, her muscles trembling as she ascended higher and higher above the cheering and mocking of her peers. Halfway up, she heard a shout from the instructors, something about speed and efficiency, about using technique. But Maya blocked it out. She relied on instinct and core strength. She adjusted her grip, twisting the rope to compensate for the slickness, and surged upward, reaching the top, where she swung herself over the edge, her chest heaving with effort and pride. She dropped to the ground below, landing hard but steady. She saw the group of men clustered together, exchanging glances, as if to say she did not belong yet. She caught a flash of the shadow again, the one observing her from the sidelines, and it was closer now. They had moved and were walking slowly along the perimeter of the field, their head tilting slightly, studying her movements, tracking her progress, and she wondered who it could be. A general and instructor? A senior officer, someone powerful and dangerous to ignore. The next obstacle was a mud crawl low to the ground, forcing her to press through cold water and muck and insects. That bit at her hands and face. She felt her uniform cling to her skin, and the smell of wet dirt fill her lungs every inch forward, a test of endurance and patience. She could hear her team yelling behind her, laughing at her struggle, their voices a mixture of derision and disbelief. She had expected it, yet every insult pushed her forward, not backward. She imagined the ropes and walls dissolving into the night air, and her focus narrowed until nothing existed but the goal, the finish line. At the end of the course, she crawled forward inch by inch through the muck, sweat, and rain stinging her eyes. She felt her fingers scrape against stone and roots, and she ignored the pain, pressing on toward the open space at the end of the crawl. She emerged from the mud, panting, her uniform, ruined, her hair plastered to her face, but her eyes locked forward, and she saw the final obstacle. A set of swinging beams high above the ground, each step requiring balance and precision. One misstep could mean a fall or failure. She climbed the first beam, placing her hands with care and stepping lightly across the slick wood. The wind picked up, catching her uniform and pulling at her balance. She teetered for a heartbeat before regaining control. And moving forward, the others cheered and mocked from below, some genuinely impressed, some still scornful, but she ignored them all. The shadow she had seen before was closer now, only a few meters from the obstacle course, and she felt a sense of tension tighten in her chest as if a storm were approaching from the horizon, and she knew she was about to be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. Her foot slipped on the third beam, a jolt of panic shooting through her body. She grabbed the beam with both hands, swinging her legs to regain balance, the fear of falling coursing through her. But she did not fall. She pressed forward with every ounce of strength and training she had absorbed in years of discipline and sweat and tears. She reached the last beam, the final step before the platform above, and with a leap that required everything she had. She landed safely, the mud and rain dripping from her uniform, forming rivulets down her arms and face. She looked around and saw the others staring at her, some shocked, some resentful, some impressed, and she smiled faintly, knowing she had earned something they could not take from her, a sense of skill and resolve. She climbed the platform at the end of the course, exhausted, but victorious, and she turned to see the shadow now fully revealed, a tall man in uniform, with insignias glinting in the dim light, his presence commanding and unyielding. He stepped forward, and the wind and rain whipped at his coat, but he did not falter. He watched her with eyes that pierced through the crowd and through her very soul. Maya felt both fear and exhilaration, her body trembling and her heart racing. She realized that this moment would change everything if he acknowledged her, if he recognized her skill, if he saw what she had done in the mud and rain and sweat and fire. The other trainees seemed to vanish. She and the figure locked eyes, and the world fell silent around them for a heartbeat that stretched like eternity. Then the whistle blew for the next exercise, and the field erupted again. Chaos and shouting and laughter and the smell of mud and sweat filled the air. Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself, her muscles screaming and her lungs burning, but she felt a resolve she had never felt before. She knew this was only the beginning of a trial that would test every limit of her body, mind, and spirit. She glanced at the shadow again. He nodded faintly, almost imperceptibly, and she felt a surge of determination. She would not fail. She could not fail. She pressed forward into the next obstacle, the unknown challenge waiting in the rain and darkness. And she knew that eyes far above her rank were watching her every move, and that one misstep could mean humiliation, failure, or something far worse. And yet she smiled and ran. The briefing room smelled of stale coffee and sweat, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead as Maya Carter stood at the back of the room, her uniform still damp from the field training. She kept her eyes forward, ignoring the murmurs and sideways glances from the men in her unit. They whispered insults and doubts, thinking she could not hear them, but every word landed sharp and clear in her mind. She let it fuel her determination, not break it. The screen at the front of the room lit up with satellite images and maps of a remote hostile region. Their mission was dangerous beyond anything they had trained for: infiltration, reconnaissance, and extraction in enemy territory. A mistake here could mean death for the entire unit. She listened carefully, absorbing every detail, memorizing terrain, coordinates, and possible hazards. The commanding officer detailed roles and responsibilities, and when it came to her, she was assigned. A secondary support role meant to keep her out of the direct line of fire, meant to remind everyone that she was not one of them, a woman among men who had long assumed dominance in every drill, every mission, every scenario. She nodded respectfully, accepting the assignment, outwardly calm, but inside a storm of anger and resolve brewed. She knew her skill exceeded what they believed she could do. She had seen the weakness in her teammates in training, and she understood that tonight she would be the one holding them together when everything went wrong. She studied the map again, plotting the path through dense forests, rivers, and high ridges. imagining ambushes, traps, snipers, and sudden chaos. As the helicopters waited on, the tarmac rain beating. Against the rotors, Maya secured her harness, checked her weapon, and double-checked the equipment she was given. She could feel the weight of expectation and doubt pressing on her chest, heavier than the rucksack strapped to her back. She climbed in with the rest of the unit, and the engines roared to life, shaking the aircraft. The men around her murmured casual conversation laced with scorn, as if talking could make their fear disappear. She stared out the window, the darkness below a canvas of clouds and wind and rain, and she thought of the shadow she had seen at the training field earlier. The one watching silently, her heart quickened. She wondered if it was him, a senior officer observing quietly, waiting for her to prove herself. The helicopter lifted into the night sky, turbulence shaking everyone inside. Maya held herself steady, her training kicking in her mind, running through contingencies and backup plans. She visualized the landing zone, the extraction point, and the path they would take through enemy territory. She noted the positions where ambushes could occur and calculated escape routes. Her teammates joked and laughed around her, oblivious to the danger, the enemy terrain, and the stakes that could decide life or death in the next few hours. The hum of the rotors filled her ears, and the rain battered the sides of the helicopter like bullets, and she gripped her weapon tighter, preparing for what was coming. The insertion was tense. The team rappelled into dense foliage, their movements silent and precise at first. But then chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed through the trees. Shouts and panic filled the night. Maya moved instinctively, diving behind cover, assessing threats. Calculating angles and neutralizing danger with precision, her teammates faltered, stepping into exposed positions, missing targets and drawing fire. She barked orders through the radio, directing movements, coordinating positions, and covering their retreat. It was a deadly ballet, and every misstep could cost lives. She ignored exhaustion, pain, and fear, focusing solely on keeping the team alive and completing the mission. At one point, a grenade exploded near her position, throwing her to the ground, mud and debris in her face. She shook her head and climbed to her feet, scanning the area. The enemy closing in faster than expected. She radioed coordinates for extraction and signaled the team to move. She could hear men cursing and panicking around her. She knew that only her calm would hold the operation together. The night was alive with shadows and movement. Every step a calculation, every heartbeat a reminder that they could die at any moment. The weight of responsibility settled on her. Shoulders heavier than any pack, heavier than any armor she had ever worn. She moved through the chaos like a ghost, leading them toward the extraction point. Unseen, unheard, untouchable. Maya noticed her commanding officer hesitate, and she could see the doubt in his eyes as he observed the team struggling. She realized she had to step further into command. She took point, moving through the thick brush, her eyes scanning every shadow, calculating every threat. She directed men to cover vulnerable angles and distracted enemy snipers. She ducked and rolled through mud and broken branches, feeling her body scream with every movement. And yet she did not falter. She knew if she failed now, everyone would pay the price. She was the anchor in the storm, the silent force holding them together when the others could not. Hours felt like minutes as they approached the extraction point, bullets whizzing past branches and leaves. Maya took a position covering the team as they crossed a small clearing. She returned fire with calculated precision, neutralizing threats one by one. She could hear the cries of the enemy and the shouts of her teammates' coordination, slowly returning through her guidance and skill. Finally, they reached the landing zone. Helicopters waiting blades, cutting the rain and darkness. They scrambled aboard, and as the aircraft lifted, Maya glanced back at the dense forest below. She could feel the weight of every life she had saved, and the lives that had almost been lost. She realized that despite their ignorance, despite their scorn, she had proven her worth tonight. Back at base, the debriefing was tense, her unit exhausted and muddy. They tried to downplay the chaos, the failures, the moments of panic. But Maya remained, calm, recounting every move, every detail, precisely. The commanding officers took notes, her observations meticulous, her analysis accurate. She knew they could not ignore her even if they wanted to. They had no choice but to acknowledge the skill and bravery she had displayed, and yet in the room sat a shadow. She recognized immediately the tall figure she had glimpsed at the training field, the one who had watched her silently, the four-star general whose reputation alone could silence a room. He observed her quietly, his gaze sharp, assessing every detail, every movement, every word. Maya felt her heart race. She knew that the final judgment was coming, and that the moment of recognition or dismissal would arrive at any second. She stood still, waiting, her pulse hammering in her ears, the whispers of her team filling the room. She could feel their doubt and resentment and their surprise at her composure as the general leaned forward, studying her silently. The tension was almost unbearable. Every breath a countdown, every second an eternity. She wondered what he would see if he saw her skill, if he saw her courage, if he saw that the mission would have failed without her. She did not flinch. She met his gaze, knowing that the moment she had been training for her entire life was finally here, and that the next move could change everything for her reputation, for her career, and for the men who had doubted her from the very beginning. The debriefing room fell into an unnatural silence, as the four-star general remained standing at the front, his gaze fixed on Maya Carter. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her. The other SEALs shifting nervously on their feet, murmuring under their breath, some still doubting. Her skill, some shocked by the outcome of the mission, and she remained calm, her mind sharp, analyzing every detail of the operation. She recounted her actions clearly, step by step, the adjustments she had made to cover the team, the threats she had neutralized the decisions that had kept every member alive. She spoke without hesitation or arrogance, and yet every word carried the authority of experience and instinct honed under pressure. The general did not speak. He did not nod. He did not move, except to shift his weight slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. The tension in the room was palpable, the kind of tension that could choke a person with its weight. She could feel it pressing down on her chest, but she stood her ground, every muscle. In her body ready for whatever judgment was coming, she knew he could dismiss her with a word or a gesture, and yet he did not. He only watched, waiting, testing, assessing every subtle movement. The air felt thick with anticipation. The other men in the room glanced at one another, exchanging worried looks. The mission had exposed their failures, and her competence had highlighted every weakness, and for the first time the hierarchy of the unit seemed fragile. Then the general walked slowly across the floor, the polished shoes making no sound against the linoleum, his posture rigid, his presence magnetic and commanding. Maya held her breath, waiting for him to speak, but he only stopped in front of her, the room holding its collective breath. She could feel her pulse racing, the adrenaline from the mission still coursing through her veins, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her eyes locked with his. She did not flinch, not for an instant, her body ready, her mind alert and sharp, every instinct screaming that this moment would define her career and that a single misstep could undo everything she had worked for. He studied her silently, his gaze sweeping from her boots to her face, to the medals and insignias she had earned, the scars from training and the exhaustion etched into her posture. He reached for his hat, and the room froze, the other SEALs stiffening as if afraid to even breathe. The general paused, holding it mid-air, a gesture so deliberate that Maya felt as if time itself had slowed down. The weight of his presence was overwhelming, and yet she remained steady, her eyes unwavering, her mind a calm storm of focus and anticipation. She had endured ridicule, harassment, and doubt from the very people who now watched silently, their mouths closed, their gazes averted, They had no words to challenge the reality of her skill or her courage, and she knew that the gesture that was about to follow would speak louder than any praise or reprimand. He tilted his head slightly as if acknowledging her efforts, silently, his eyes locking with hers in a way that conveyed recognition, understanding, and approval. The general lowered his hand in a salute, the motion precise, formal, and absolute in its simplicity. The room seemed to exhale as the soundless gesture echoed in the minds of everyone present. It was a recognition that no words could equal, a confirmation that she had earned respect, not through entitlement or favoritism, but through action, courage, and skill. She felt a surge of pride and something deeper, the validation she had been denied for years from peers and instructors alike. It burned away every doubt, every insult, every whisper of inadequacy, and replaced it with a quiet, unshakable certainty that she belonged, that she was recognized at the highest level for the value she brought to the team and to every mission she would undertake from this moment forward. The other SEALs stared in stunned silence, some lowering their heads. In shame, others unable to hide their disbelief. They had underestimated her. They had dismissed her as weak, and yet here she stood in front of them, unbroken, unbowed, and recognized by a man whose reputation alone demanded obedience and respect. The general turned slowly without another word, his boots echoing across the floor as he left the room, and the silence lingered longer than anyone expected. Maya remained standing, her chest heaving slightly, her eyes following him for a moment before. Shifting to the faces of her teammates, they avoided her gaze. Some angry, some embarrassed, some beginning to understand the reality of her skill and courage. She did not speak. She did not need to. The message had been delivered loud and clear. Without a single word, the room would never view her the same again. After the general left, the commanding officer approached her, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his posture betrayed respect mixed with hesitation. He nodded once curtly, acknowledging her contributions. The rest of the team shifted uneasily. The dynamic had changed. Everything they had known about their hierarchy, about skill, about leadership had been disrupted, and Maya felt the weight of it. She realized that respect was no longer optional. It was hers by right, earned through the fire and pressure of missions, and the recognition of someone who saw beyond gender status or preconceived notions. She could feel the shift in energy around her, a subtle tremor of awareness that they would not forget the lesson she had taught them and that her presence would no longer be ignored. As she walked back to her quarters, the hallway quiet, except for her boots against the floor, she replayed every detail of the past hours, the mission, the chaos, the risk, the judgment, and the salute she had received. A ripple of emotion coursing through her, pride, relief, anticipation, and a quiet determination. She understood that the moment was not an endpoint but a threshold. The general had seen her potential, and now she wondered what he would ask of her next, what challenge he would assign that only someone of her skill and resolve could undertake. Her mind ran through possibilities, missions, covert operations, high-risk assignments that would test everything she had learned, every instinct, every ounce of courage and skill she had cultivated in her years of training, and she felt a thrill of excitement and fear, knowing that her journey was far from over. She paused outside the door to her quarters, glancing back at the empty corridor, at the echoes of the mission, and the silent acknowledgement of the general. She could feel a sense of purpose solidifying inside her, a mission that was hers alone, a responsibility that only she could carry forward. The night outside was still wet and cold, and she knew that the world beyond the base was waiting for her skills, for her judgment, for her courage, and she smiled faintly at the thought, knowing that whatever came next, she would be ready. The shadow of the general's recognition lingered like a silent promise, and she could feel it shaping her future. Every step she took away from the debriefing room, a whisper of destiny guiding her toward a path she could not yet fully see. The helicopters carried Maya Carter and her team into the rising sun. The engines droning in her ears, the cold wind whipping against her face, the mist clinging to her uniform as if reluctant to let her go. She gripped her weapon tighter, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Heavier than any pack or armor she had ever carried, every eye in the cabin on the mission. Every mind alert to the dangers ahead, she felt the pulse of adrenaline mixing with a calm focus, the kind that came only from experience, from facing danger and surviving, and knowing that lives depended on every decision she made. The folder from the general rested on her lap, the sealed documents now open, revealing a mission more complex than anything she had undertaken before, enemy forces entrenched in hostile terrain. Intelligence incomplete and ambiguous, requiring her to make split-second decisions with consequences that could be catastrophic. She scanned the maps, memorized the coordinates, every potential hazard, calculating angles, escape routes, cover, and extraction points. She visualized the mission unfolding step by step, anticipating ambushes, booby traps, sniper positions, and patrol patterns, the stakes high, every error deadly. Yet she felt a thrill coursing through her veins. She was alive more than ever before. Her team moved quietly around her. Their whispers hushed the tension thick in the cabin, some avoiding her gaze, others watching her closely, learning perhaps for the first time the level of skill she possessed, the authority she commanded without words. The confidence that emanated from her every gesture and decision. She could feel the weight of their doubts dissipating, the respect forming slowly like a shield around her, even as she noted their weaknesses and the mistakes they had made during previous operations. She did not chastise or belittle. She simply planned, coordinated, and led with the precision of someone who had fought through ridicule and doubt to emerge unbroken, unshaken, and capable. The flight stretched into hours of tense preparation. Every detail she examined, the terrain below, winding rivers, dense forests, jagged cliffs, and enemy positions mapped and memorized. She spoke little, issuing soft, concise instructions to the team, confirming roles, checking gear, and reviewing emergency protocols. Her voice calm but carrying authority. Every command measured, every suggestion considered the slightest. Hesitation could mean disaster. She felt the weight of command and the exhilaration of knowing that she had earned it through action, courage, and skill, not entitlement or favoritism. As the helicopter approached the drop zone, the terrain below shrouded. In mist and shadow, Maya felt her senses heighten, her heart steady. Despite the adrenaline, a quiet storm of readiness coiled inside her. She ran through the mission again in her mind, every movement, every possible encounter, the extraction points, backup plans, contingencies for every possible failure. She felt the tension of anticipation pressing in around her, but it was a tension she welcomed. It sharpened her focus, her instincts ready, her mind clear and unflinching. She glanced at her team, one by one, noting their readiness, the uncertainty in their eyes, and the subtle shift toward trust and recognition they had never shown her before. The landing was tense, the helicopter skimming the treetops, then dropping into a clearing barely visible. Through the mist, blades churning and mud spraying, the team disembarked, moving quickly and silently under her direction. She led them through the dense undergrowth, signaling and directing with gestures and whispers, covering angles and flanking positions, every movement calculated, every step. Deliberate enemy patrols spotted in the shadows, snipers taking positions. She neutralized threats quietly, precise and lethal, without hesitation or doubt. The mission was alive and dangerous every moment. A test of courage and skill, and every decision she made could tip the balance between success and catastrophe. Hours passed like minutes, the team moving through enemy territory, every step guided by Maya's commands, every threat anticipated and neutralized. She remained calm, focused, observant, directing with precision, coordinating the group through ambushes, improvised explosives, and patrols, relying on instinct, experience, and intelligence. She moved like a shadow, invisible yet omnipresent. Her presence, the anchor keeping the team together, the mission progressing under her control. Despite the chaos surrounding them, she felt the surge of triumph tempered by the constant awareness that one mistake could undo everything. And yet she pressed forward, driven by skill, courage, and the knowledge that she had earned her place among the best. Finally, they reached the extraction point, the helicopters waiting as the enemy forces closed in, the team exhausted, covered in mud and sweat. Yet alive and intact, she coordinated the final retreat. Every signal, every step planned, every threat neutralized the last of the enemy forces driven back or incapacitated the extraction smooth but tense, her eyes scanning constantly for the slightest movement. The team moving behind her in formation, their trust in her unquestioned, now the weight of command heavy on her shoulders, yet tempered by the exhilaration of completion, the mission successful under her leadership and skill as the aircraft lifted off into the early morning sky. Maya looked down at the terrain, fading below the mist, swirling around jagged rocks, rivers, and forests. The memory of the general's silent salute vivid in her mind, a reminder that recognition had been earned. But so too had responsibility. The horizon brightening with the rising sun, she allowed herself a single moment to breathe, to absorb the weight and triumph of the mission. She knew there would be more challenges, more tests, more moments where she would be the anchor, the unseen force keeping others alive. And yet she felt ready, every fiber of her being alive with anticipation, courage, and skill, the future uncertain and dangerous, yet she welcomed it. And as the base disappeared below the clouds, and the sun broke fully over the horizon, casting long golden shadows, Maya Carter sat poised, ready alert, every sense alive, her mind sharp and prepared for whatever came next. Knowing that she had proven herself beyond doubt, and yet aware that the path ahead would demand even more skill, courage, and resolve every heartbeat, a promise of action, every breath, a preparation for the unknown. She closed her eyes briefly. A single thought lingering in her mind, the challenges ahead could be deadly, but she was ready, and nothing could stop her now.